how executives are regaining control of their ERP projects, the widening IT talent gap, and why Kingfisher said no to SAP S4HANA. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 254 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 254. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation and ERP journeys. And this is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. And this is, of course, tech-agnostic, not affiliated with any software vendors. So we're just here to share with you the hard, cold truth of digital transformation projects. And joining me, as always, is Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Great episode lined up for you today. I'm excited for this. We've got a few social media questions we're going to get to here today. We're going to talk about the widening IT talent gap and how some organizations are delaying ERP upgrades. So those are a couple of the newsworthy topics we'll cover. And then later in the show, we'll bring on Stuart Robb, who's the Executive Vice President at our Third Stage Consulting office in Europe. And he's going to join me to talk about how to stop being managed by your system integrators and how executives are regaining control of their ERP and digital transformation projects. And then later in the show, in our final segment, we'll talk about a company called Kingfisher out of Europe. It's a very large organization, retail organization, how and why they said no to an SAP S4HANA upgrade and what they did instead, because I think it's a really interesting case study of what some organizations are doing to navigate their own digital roadmaps, regardless of what vendors may or may not want their customers to do. So a lot of good stuff we're going to get to here today. But before we jump into some of those topics, Darian, what are some of the social media questions we've received recently?
Yeah, this first question actually is from the YouTube video that the audience, you guys will get to watch later today and that Eric and I will discuss. But it was, this is not the first retail that refused to roll out SAP, despite the high costs that were gone with that decision. Right, Eric?
Yes, it is a good point. And it is not the first retailer or the first large organization to decide that they're not going to upgrade S4HANA. In fact, the latest statistics I've seen from a couple of different studies show that a majority of legacy SAP customers have yet to make the switch to S4HANA. So there's a lot of larger organizations out there that have not made the move. But I think what's interesting about Kingfisher and what we'll talk about later in this episode is the fact that they not only said no to an S4HANA upgrade, but they did it very objectively and very rationally. It was a very rational business-based decision, and it wasn't a no decision. I think that's the big difference with what I like about the Kingfisher case study is that they didn't decide they're just going to do nothing. They decided, oh, we are going to go through a digital transformation. It's just not going to involve S4HANA. And at the same time, they've also said, and we're not getting rid of SAP. We like SAP. We like ECC. We like the products we have, but we're going to build on top of that rather than replacing something that isn't broken and has no ROI in their case. So I think that's the interesting thing about them is they're the first company I've seen that has come out and publicly talked about this. And I think that's the interesting thing too, because, a lot of companies are talking about it behind closed doors. We have a lot of clients that talk about it behind closed doors. And I would love to share more of those case studies because they're really, really good examples, but because of confidentiality, we actually can't talk about our clients as much as I would like on this podcast or on our YouTube videos or anything like that. So the fact that they came out, Kingfisher is not a client of Third Stages, but they spoke at a Gartner conference about what their roadmap looked like and why they went about it. And so they're the first large organization I know of that has been willing to come out publicly and talk about their alternate to what SAP is suggesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question today is interesting because I know we talk about third party quite often on here. And this question is, how do these third party companies provide security patches, etc., for ECC?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because they are providing them. When you look at Rimini Street or Spinnaker support, those are the two main ones that I'm familiar with, the main third party support providers for SAP. And they also provide support for JD Edwards and VMware and even Salesforce, I believe it is. So they've got several different solutions that they provide third party support for. In the case of SAP, I know they are providing security patches as well. And a lot of times, I'm not sure if they're patches that are officially developed by SAP or if they've developed their own. That I don't know. But I do know they provide security patches, and they're a large organization that has the resources to do it. So I think that's one of the interesting things about it, is that they are providing those security patches the same, in a similar kind of way that SAP would provide it if you're getting your support and maintenance through SAP directly.
For sure. And definitely a great question. I'm sure lots of questions come up like that when people are considering third party. So definitely a great question from the audience there.
Yeah.
But wanting to get into our first article of the day today, which is all about the widening IT talent gap. So here's a quick version of kind of what's happening, what this article said. A growing IT talent shortage is forcing executive teams to slow down, rethink, and in some cases, reset their AI and digital transformation strategies. This isn't about hesitation, it's about realism. For years, AI roadmaps assumed organizations could easily hire or train the talent needed to implement, govern, and sustain these technologies. That assumption no longer holds. Skilled IT, data, and AI professionals are increasingly scarce, expensive, and difficult to retain. As a result, many C-suite leaders are realizing that ambitious AI strategies don't fail because the technology doesn't work. They fail because organizations don't have the people, processes, or governance models to operationalize them. This talent gap is exposing a deeper issue. AI has been moved beyond experimentation and into enterprise infrastructure, and the infrastructure requires stability, accountability, and long-term ownership, not just innovation. That realization is forcing leaders to scale back overly complex AI initiatives, reprioritize foundational systems like ERP and data platforms, focus on automation and AI that can realistically be supported, rethink operating models that depend heavily on niche technical roles. And the bigger takeaway here is this: AI strategy is no longer a tech roadmap, it's an organizational capacity decision. This really isn't about the AI hype cooling off. It's about enterprises recognizing that sustainable transformation depends on aligning technology ambition with human capability. And that recalibration will directly shape ERP modernization, automation, and priorities heading into 2026. With all that, Eric, is the IT talent gap a real limiter of AI adoption, not technology maturity? Or what is your opinion on this?
It's a great point and something I hadn't thought a lot about, honestly, until you brought it up. But it's something we have talked about in the context of digital transformations in general. We've talked in the past on this podcast about how there are limited resources as it relates to supporting all these cloud migrations that organizations are still going through. We just talked about SAP and all the organizations that have yet to move to S/4HANA. Same is true for Oracle. Oracle's trying to get a lot of their customers to move over to cloud ERP. Microsoft is still moving a lot of their legacy customers over to D365 in the cloud. So you look at this compressed timeline, relatively speaking, that a lot of organizations are trying to go through their cloud migrations. Now you add AI to the mix, and it's just putting a strain on technology resources, which you would think, okay, if I can't find outside resources, maybe I develop those competencies in-house. But the problem there is most organizations don't have a bench of people that have the qualifications to help enable an AI project. So that's not a good option for a lot of organizations. And then you add to the fact that executives want to move fast on AI, and investors in many cases are pushing their boards and their management teams to deploy AI in the name of efficiency gains and cost savings and all that stuff. And it's creating a demand on resources that were already strained to begin with. And then the other dynamic that's at play here is that the big tech companies are trying to find ways to use AI and other forms of automation to get rid of some of their technical resources. So the exact technical resources that were already in high demand and short supply are further constrained by the fact that a lot of these big tech companies are laying off technical people. They say it's because of AI, but I think it's actually a broader softness in the tech space. But maybe part of it is due to AI. So I think it's a strange time we're in where we need technical resources more than ever, but we've got less of them. I don't know if we have less of them more than ever, but it seems like we don't have nearly enough. And that's just not a good recipe for success. And I'll be curious to see how that affects the success rate of these projects going forward.
For sure. And in your opinion, do you think that automation is being kind of oversold as talent replacement to some of these companies?
Yeah, in some cases. I mean, I think there's a couple schools of thought. I mean, and I think they both seem pretty legitimate. One school of thought says, yes, I'm going to use AI to minimize headcount or reduce headcount in the long term. There's another school of thought that's probably just as strong as the first one, which is I'm not going to lay off people, but I'm going to give people better tools to do a better job. I would say the one thing I would say is that second category is probably easier. It's going to be a lot easier to get people on board and to be part of the change and to embrace the change. For those organizations that are blatantly coming out and saying we want to reduce headcount with AI, good luck trying to get your team on board with that, because why would you? If you're an employee, why are you going to get excited about AI when it could potentially replace your job? But if I have security or if I have confidence that my job is going to remain and you're going to give me AI as a way to be more effective and even better at my job, that's a different story. And so I think that's something that leaders aren't really thinking about is, yes, you may long-term be able to reduce headcount or maybe not hire as many people longer term, but it's just not realistic, in my opinion, that you're just going to see any immediate or short-term labor cost savings. I've been in the ERP space for a long time, and I remember when I first started, we'd create these business cases that assume that you're going to reduce X amount of headcount as a result of ERP, and those benefits rarely, if ever, materialized. Usually the benefits ended up being more along the lines of they could do their jobs better, you have better information, you could make better decisions, you could optimize your inventory, you could optimize your receivables. You could do certain things that affect your cash and your profitability. You could do those things better, but it's rare that it comes from reducing headcount. I mean, we have yet to see technology have a huge immediate impact on reducing headcount, although it's possible long-term it will, but in the short term, I don't see it happening.
For sure. And last question here, kind of like ERP, it went from hype, infrastructure, governance, talent constraints. Does AI right now starting to mirror kind of what ERP has been going through over the last few decades?
Maybe, but it's happening a lot faster. I mean, the AI cycle, the adoption cycle, the hype cycle, everything around AI is like what ERP was on steroids. I mean, it's just exponentially faster, exponentially more hype, exponentially more immediate investment, and probably exponentially more misunderstanding of what the technology can and can't do. I worry that it's another silver bullet. It's another easy button, easy answer that executives are looking for, and they're not going to fully understand how it's going to impact their organization and how to navigate that change, because I think AI is the easy button, and that's what I worry about. But we'll have to see how that unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to get into our next newsworthy article of the day, we're going to talk about how organizations are starting to deliberately delay ERP upgrades even when their budgets are approved. So this article explains that companies are hitting internal limits long before they hit financial ones. Leadership teams are realizing they don't have the decision-making bandwidth, process clarity, or change capacity to absorb large ERP upgrades right now. In other words, ERP programs aren't stalling because executives don't want them. They're stalling because organizations can't operate them successfully. A major theme here is decision fatigue. ERP upgrades assume fast, consistent decisions from business leaders. In reality, those leaders are already stretched thin by operational pressures, regulatory change, talent shortages, and parallel transformation initiatives. Another factor is risk awareness. So after years of ERP overruns and value gaps, organizations are more cautious, and many are choosing to pause, phase, or slow upgrades rather than rushing into high impact changes they can't properly govern. This article also highlights a shift mindset. ERP upgrades are no longer treated as IT projects. They're being recognized as enterprise-wide operating model changes, and those require readiness, not just funding. So with this, Eric, one, are you seeing this same theme with clients that you are working with? And is this something that you're seeing consistently as well?
Yeah, we do have a subset of clients that are on that same page or that same mindset of not upgrading because they don't have the budget, they don't have the resources, they don't have the change capabilities, whatever the case may be. On one hand, I think, well, it's better late than never. At least they're starting to recognize that some of these clients that we work with, some of these organizations throughout the world, and it does make me wonder, what's changed, because I would argue that most organizations have never really had the propensity or the strong capability to change. The big difference now, I suppose, is the technology and the world in general is changing so much faster than it ever has, that maybe people are finally realizing that we are not nimble enough, or we're not flexible enough to be able to change that quickly. But on the other hand, the other part of me says, well, what are you going to do? Rather than avoid, you're avoiding the problem if you say, well, we just don't have the change capability, so we're not going to do an ERP upgrade. Now, I don't think you should just force your hand and test that theory by just investing, a 8 or 9 figure budget project, throwing that into the mix to test that hypothesis. I would not do that, but you do think, okay, is it all or nothing? Is it a binary decision that's yes, we upgrade, no, we don't? Or are there more incremental advances we can make that are right sized to fit our ability to change? And at the same time, how can we build our change muscles better? How can we flex those muscles and build them? So I think you have to be able to look at both, and good leaders are able to do both. They're realistic about what they can do, but they're also willing to push or bend the organization without breaking it.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that ERP delays are actually a sign of maturity, or what do you think that sign is?
It's a good question. I don't know. I suppose that's a good question. I've never thought about that. I guess I would think on one hand, in some cases, it's a sign of maturity and self-awareness organizationally, which has been sorely lacking amongst organizations as it relates to technology projects historically. So I think it's good in some cases that they are maybe becoming more self-aware or more realistic about what technology can or can't do. And perhaps it's the decades of failures and the wasted money on IT projects in the past that has finally caught up to some of these organizations. But on the other hand, I do think there's probably a subset of organizations that are taking the easy way out, which is do nothing. And in some cases, it makes sense. I mean, just because you're not investing in technology doesn't mean that you're necessarily sitting still and you're going to fail as an organization. But at some point, you do have to figure out how you're going to keep up with the changes and roll with the changes and all that stuff. So I think it's probably, to answer your question, probably a mix of both. I think in some cases it's organizational maturity and awareness. In some cases it's a cop out, or the easy way out is just to do nothing. So if it's deliberate and strategic, then fine. If it still makes sense not to upgrade, then that makes sense. But if you're not upgrading just because you don't want to deal with it, or you don't have a better answer, that's probably not a good answer, because there probably is a way you can navigate that in a way that's going to increase your chances of success.
For sure. And last question here, with ERP, what should leaders do while upgrades are being delayed?
Well, there's a lot of incremental stuff you can do. I mean, you think about all the value that you're probably not getting out of your current legacy environment, whether it's because you haven't deployed all the modules you already paid for, whether it's because you haven't integrated systems, whether it's because the data hasn't been cleaned up in decades. Maybe you don't have the right project governance in place, or the right data governance in place. Maybe people haven't been trained appropriately on the software. There's probably a lot you could be doing right now that doesn't require a big investment, that could have a big high value impact. And in some cases, it might actually be a higher ROI than doing a big, massive digital transformation, because you could probably invest a lot less time, money, and risk into the project and get a really good return on that. So there are things like that you can do just with your legacy environment. And then there's also the more incremental changes. I mean, perhaps there's certain parts of your business that are hurting or aren't using technology effectively, and maybe there's a point solution you could put in place to help improve certain parts of your business without necessarily having to rip out the entire back office systems. And the same is true for AI. I mean, a lot of organizations are thinking about AI. I think I saw some stats that 2026 is the tipping point essentially of AI interest and investment and adoption for organizations. So most organizations, from what I can tell, are pretty interested in leveraging AI. So how could you do that potentially without having to go through all the pain and risk and cost and heartburn of a big ERP implementation? And we have a few clients. We have 3 clients right now that are in flight where we're not doing ERP implementations. We're actually doing AI strategy and implementation projects for their legacy environments. Now they are making some incremental improvements to their technology, but they're not waiting until they do a big, massive rip and replace of their ERP system before they leverage AI. So there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different paths you can go down. It's not just all or nothing, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with all of that, I'm super excited to get into today's conversation.
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited to have Stuart back on the show. He's a longtime guest here. He's been on several times over the last several years of this podcast. He's collaborated. He and I have collaborated for a long time now. He's been with Third Stage for 6 or 7 years now. He is our executive vice president of our European office of Third Stage Consulting, and he's going to be on the show talking about how executives are regaining control of their ERP implementations and their system integrators. We're going to talk about that here with Stuart in just a moment. And then later in the show, we'll talk about why Kingfisher said no to an SAP S4HANA upgrade and what they did instead. So be sure to stick around for that. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 254. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And this show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent tech agnostic consulting firm. that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformations, including their digital strategies and selection of software, but also their phase 0 implementation planning and the program management and change management behind those implementations. So be sure to reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about Third Stage and how we can help you with your digital transformation initiative. And this show is produced by Major Tom Productions. So if you'd like to learn more about how to collaborate with us on this podcast or other content we create, please feel free to reach out to us. I've included contact information below. So I'm excited for our guest. Today's guest on the show, Stuart Robb, is the Executive Vice President of our European office at Third Stage Consulting in London. And he's going to be on the show here, and I'm inviting him on to talk about system integrators. Both he and I come from a big consultancy background. We've been on the other side of having been part of the machine, if you will, but we've also more recently been on this side of the machine, which is how do we manage that machine? How do we leverage the strengths and capabilities that system integrators bring to the table, but without letting them run awry or run haywire with an open checkbook? How do we do that? And that's what we want to talk about here today. So with all that being said, thanks for joining the show, Stuart.
Thanks very much, Eric. Good to be here. I'm in Ascot, actually, which is just outside London, near the racecourse. So.
Got it.
Not quite central London at the moment.
Yeah, the greater London area, which isn't very descriptive, as big as London is, as sprawling as London is. But thanks for being here today. Tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, Stuart, just tell us a little bit about your background for those that don't know you and your upbringing in the consulting space, the tech space, the Big Four consulting space, all that stuff.
Yeah, sure. So obviously I'm EVP, Executive Vice President of Third Stage for EMEA. Working currently in a consulting firm, but hopefully with a slightly different aspect than you would get from the Big Four Tier 1s. I started in IT 42 years ago, and then eventually made my way in the mainframe world, joining or working with Anderson Consulting from about 1996, I guess, to 2000. And then I was AAP at Ernst & Young, which became Capgemini, Ernst & Young, for a couple of years. And then I went to Australia to become Director of Transformation Consulting at Capgemini Australia. And then I went freelancing for 15 years until I met you. So, but I've always had, in ERP, you always have close relationships with the SIs. So, I've variously worked with IBM, as Young, obviously, Capgemini, obviously, Anderson's, now Accenture, Deloitte, I've worked with a lot recently, KPMG, PwC. So, I don't think there's many left for me to get a sort of steak knives.
Right. You've covered all the bases there.
Pretty much.
And I have to a lesser degree, I have a similar background as far as having come from the Big Four consulting firms originally, although you spent a lot more time working at various Big Four consultancies. So I'm hoping that here today we have kind of a unique perspective because we've been part of the Big Four, but we also have seen the other side of the Big Four consultancies. And I know one thing you and I have talked about over the years is there's definite value in what SIs bring to the table, especially the Big Four, the bigger SIs. But there's also a downside risk that needs to be managed as well. And that's what we'll dive into here today.
Yeah, the synopsis, the snapshot of the whole conversation is if you manage an SI well, they will do very well for you because they employ very, very bright people generally who are, supposedly leaders in their game or leaders in their industry. And they work on very, very, very large, complex engagements. And actually, it's rarely that you find an SI has problems with its people. It's quite often a client's inability to manage an SI or understand what they're bringing to the party. Now, having said that, some SIs are, not optimal. I was at one client which was doing a big re-engineering project for it was an insurance company. And I remember walking into the SI's office and every desk had introduction to COBOL on it, which they'd given to all of their graduates and people who were working on the project, because all of them had come out of university with C++ and all the rest of it. None of them knew COBOL, and here we were paying £1,000, £1,200, £1,400 a day for people to program a mainframe that had never done it before.
Right.
So those are the kind of gotchas that you're gonna have to watch out for. But I mean, in general, on the 80th percentile, you're going to get good people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think the least of our worries in the digital transformation and ERP space is finding smart people. I think there's a lot of really smart people in this industry, especially at the Big Four, and I do agree with you on that. I think they do have a way of finding raw talent and young talent and very smart people. That's I've never really observed that to be a problem or an issue. That's really the least of the issues.
Well, and they pay them extremely well as well. So which is why they're getting paid well. We're paying a lot in fees for them.
Right.
And why would we do that? Well, because they have access to people that are trained in a methodology that's a specific methodology. So we don't have to create a methodology or train them in how to do something. We don't have to build a team. We don't have to have that team on board all the time. We can roll people on and off, and they go back onto the bench as we choose. So SIs get a very bad rap. And sometimes legitimately so, but actually there are a lot of upsides. Very few ERPs are delivered through an in-house team. Nearly all of them of any size will be farmed out to one of the SIs. The trick is to get a good one, and B, to manage them well.
Right. Well, let's start with the latter point you just made, the second point you just made around managing them well. Why? So if we've got smart people, we've got these credible, well-respected consulting firms out there, and not just the Big Four. I mean, you've got other top-tier providers that are well-respected in the industry, and let's assume they've all got smart people, they've all got good methodologies. Why is it, or how is it, that organizations then manage to lose control of the system integrator and the overall project as a whole?
Well, there's a whole, the thing is that usually it all starts going wrong right at the beginning. So you'll come out with a set of requirements. The requirements won't really properly articulate what it is you want. You won't have thought of all of the target operating model implications. 50% of it you might not even know the answer to, like what is our current state of our data estate, and how do we do that data migration. At the beginning of a program, you might not even know. So the smart people will do a reasonably detailed discovery, having decided on which ERP they're using, having selected an SI, based on a response to a set of requirements. The smart people will do a discovery before they ever get to a contract stage. So they'll do 3 months and they'll say, right, you're our supplier in principle. We're going to see how we're going to work with you. We're going to see whether you're bringing on your A team. If you bring on your A team, we're going to get a key man policy on those people so that we hold on to them when you start delivering it. And you're going to find out everything we haven't told you and everything you don't know, so that when we do a contract with you, which is we call a statement of work, that basically covers the engagement in sufficient detail that you narrow the boundaries at which they can start straying outside of the brief. So a lot of organizations will just go, great, we've chosen an SI, let's contract. And they will sign the contract. The SOW statement will be rubbish or next to rubbish. It'll have massive gaps in it. And as with all the things, you contract in haste, you repent at leisure, right? And so start wrong, end up wrong. I think the other thing is, you said the word lose control. I think what happens, in my experience, in most organizations is the organization cede control.
Yeah, it's a good point of clarification.
And so they assume the SI will come in and run it for them. They have next to no commercial oversight. They have next to no delivery oversight. And then they get very surprised when the SIs run out of control. And it's because most people don't even understand what the SI is doing for them. I was on an engagement where every time there was a problem, the SI brought on another project manager. I mean, we had project managers, literally, there must have been one for making the tea. There were so many of them.
Right.
And it's because the SI had a massive bench where it recently had a project that had got stopped, and they had loads and loads of project managers on the bench. And the SI is there to get their bench off of their premises and onto your premises. So unless you're very wise to that, and unless you are really gating that whole process of onboarding and making it really clear what these people are doing, well, just put as many people as they can on. That, you know, it's the old Wolf of Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street thing, isn't it? You know, my job is to take my client's money from their pocket and put it into my pocket. That is all they are there to do. Yes, they'll do some nice delivery, and yes, they'll give you a nice ERP, maybe, but that's not what they're there for. They're there to fatten their partners' wallets and to make sure they're not spending money on people that are not on client sites. And you are the gatekeeper. You vet who comes on. You decide whether they're any good. You send them home if they're not. It's all in your power. And most organizations just don't exercise it. They just give it all away. Say to the SI, click on. You know, it's nuts.
It's the easy answer on paper because you're the expert, right? You're the expert. I don't do this every day like you do. I want you to do it right. So I'm just going to outsource this whole thing to you, which there's some merit to some degree of that. But I think if you go too far that direction, you're right. You're just going to have a conflict of interest.
I mean, I'm doing an engagement at the moment. It's quite complex with an SI, got multiple dimensions to it. The SOW for just the one stage we're doing at the moment is over 150 pages. Wow. And it goes into precisely what the scope is and what it isn't. It lists every interface, every bank account, every legal entity. It covers every geography. It covers all the headcount in the geographies. It goes on and on and on and on and on. It's like the perfect project initiation document. In fact, that actually is what it's based on. But the most important thing it has, and I find it baffling, and I come across this time and time again, it has a list of deliverables from each stage or each phase that you can measure. You can measure for quality and you can measure for cost. Every deliverable is broken down by cost. Now, some people say, actually, well, you know, that's far too much effort, and the effort to put that together is onerous. Well, that's why we do a 3-month discovery, because it's building the SOW in a partnership effectively. But there is an alternative way, which I've also used successfully, but it carries a much larger risk profile and generally tends to serve outsourcing style engagements rather than delivery engagements, which is actually, you don't bother with an SOW at all. You just say, the solution that you deliver must produce these business outcomes. So let's say if it was a telco, you must be able to go on, order a phone, add the accessories, create the price plan, have it delivered to your door, and it must be, when you switch it on, it must automatically enable and activate. And your UAT is against that outcome. It's not against a billion business requirements. Yes, there are loads of business requirements about administration and fixing somebody's bill if they've cocked it up or whatever. But the implicit business requirement is you can either provision a phone or you can't. If you can't, you're not getting paid. If you can, happy days. There you go. So either way works and either way doesn't work. It just, as I said, you have to kind of navigate your way through the engagement to decide which way you want to go. Lots and lots of detail or almost no detail at all and just nail them on business outcome.
Right. No, that's great. And it's a great point because the other issue is that even with all that detail early in a project, a lot of times you don't know enough about the project, all the assumptions and the scope. A lot of times you don't know enough because you haven't done the due diligence. You haven't gotten into discovery, requirements gathering a lot of times.
Yeah. I mean, it's a multi-step process. So, as I said, when the current engagement I'm working on with a client at the moment, and I'm sure Deloitte won't lie me telling you that it's Deloitte. We started off effectively with a RFP there was a piece of work that was done actually before I joined the project, which was all the traditional requirements. But at the point we were engaging, I just said it's perfectly simple. I want a working version of D365 for this business. That's it. You'll get paid if it works. You get slaughtered if it won't. And then they did the discovery. And then when they'd done the discovery, we had our 150-page SOW, and we had lots and lots of stage gates, lots of detail in how it would be delivered, how it would be paid, and there's a concept called burn down, which I'll talk about in a little while when we're talking about what good governance looks like. But it was effectively a multi-step contracting process. So business outcome first. Can you deliver this business outcome? Yes, we can. Good. How and how much is it going to cost? Step 2.
Right. Yeah. These are some good strategies to manage all these moving parts. Here's a question that came up a little bit earlier in this conversation, Stuart, and this is from Ken on LinkedIn. And this is something. This is in response to, I think, to a comment I made about young talent. But Ken says, why is the word young always used in the same sentence with good talent? Why isn't the experienced talent held in the same esteem, those of us with tacit knowledge, along with explicit knowledge? And that's a great point. And that I in no way want to suggest that people with experience are not talented. I think my point was more about the youth of some of the big 4 consulting firms, and not so much older people or more experienced people don't have it. But it is a good point. It is worth talking about is, how hard is it to find people that actually have experience under their belts, people that don't have to come in and read the training manuals like you were talking about, Stuart? How hard is that to find?
I have to be very careful what I say here, because there's all sorts of employment laws and things like that I can't tread it too carefully on.
I've never known you to have a filter, so why start
now? No. We're not allowed to have ageism at all. It has to be completely agnostic. So quite rarely you'll get a CV where it won't say the person's age at all. But I can read a CV and roughly position how old they are within 30 seconds just by where they've worked, what they've done, who they've worked for. My preference actually is I prefer people with more experience. So if you're talking about 30 to 35 plus, you will get better. Generally, you'll get better people who are more mature in the workplace. And my teams tend, I tend to try to build teams of like people. Where you've got newer technologies like AI, you tend to have to go younger. And sometimes you find those teams don't mix terribly well. There's an attitudinal and cultural, used culturally in inverted commas. It's the millennial versus the Gen whatever we are, Gen X or something. And there is a different way of behaving and a different way of engaging that, I'm 59, 60 this year. It's just completely alien to me. So I tend to try and find a manager to bring in and say, you manage this lot. And you just tell me when they've done what they're supposed to do. So I'm not, I think I wouldn't use young and good talent. I would use good talent. I wouldn't associate it with a particular age group. You can have great talent who are young. You can have great talent who are old, or you can have rubbish talent at any age.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there is not a correlation between age and talent. It's, I think,
experience.
Yeah, age and experience, of course. Yeah. And I think the other thing, too, is that sometimes, and this is just a very broad generalization that does not apply in many, maybe even most cases, but sometimes you'll see people that have been doing this for so long that the only risk I see with the more experienced people at times is that sometimes they stop listening or they stop asking questions because they think I've done this a million times. Yeah, Mr. or Mrs. Client, you're not that different. You're all the same. Just follow best practices. You sort of get more of a myopic view sometimes. But that's,
I mean, let's be honest though. I mean, I think I said this in the last one of these we did. I mean, ERPs are adding up and taking away, right? They're not really very difficult. I mean, add one to the stock count, decrement one to the
right.
stock. You don't. They're difficult to implement, not because conceptually they're difficult to do. Conceptually, they're very simple things to do, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's accounting or whatever it is. It's a very, very simple thing to do. Which then, you then go, well, why do so many of them go wrong? It's usually because people don't understand and underestimate the effort it takes to change people from the job they do today to the job they do tomorrow. And no SI is going to help you. Well, they will say they will help you, but changing people's behavior and changing what people do every day is the really difficult thing. It's not, can I config this to do this or that? Very, very rarely have I ever pulled a ERP or a billing, actually, which for telco is much more complex. I think I've done it once. And that's because there was a misalignment between two systems calculating VAT. It kept coming up with different numbers in both systems because of a rounding error and therefore giving the customer the wrong offer. And that was such a subtle thing. I mean, we just didn't spot it in UAT, and so I had to pull it, and it was horrible, and we had to spend 3 months figuring out how to fix it and release it again. But that is extremely rare.
Right.
The normal thing that goes wrong is the client loses control of the scope, or the costs start running out of control because all sorts of things start being surfaced that we didn't think about when we started, and we didn't put in enough contingency, or quite rarely does it go back to the technical implementation. As I said, it does happen now and again, but it's generally quite rare.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too around, changing people's jobs, changing people's behavior, changing the way they operate today. That does not happen simply because you have a functioning technology in place. But I think it's easy for us as consultants at times to downplay or to disregard how things work today because we know we want to change it. In some cases, we know that it is subpar. And so rather than saying, this process sucks, so you should just change it, it's easy to say that as an outsider. Like, Stuart, the way you do things today, it's a mess, it's inefficient, it's ineffective. Just stop doing that and use this technology because this technology is better. That's not going to be very effective, even if that's true.
Well,
you have ownership of that.
That's the Elon Musk thing, right? I mean, Elon Musk did this little vignette a few years ago. All requirements are rubbish. So, and he's right. All requirements are rubbish. You can never articulate a requirement in sufficient clarity to be clear about what you mean. And most of the requirements will always be based on what you know about and have done today, not a fresh set of thinking on requirements tomorrow. So, it's absolutely, he's absolutely correct. And actually, he's also correct that probably 30% of things that businesses do, they should just stop doing altogether because they actually add no value. So, do they add customer value? Do they add revenue or profitability? No. Are they statutory required? No. Stop doing them then. So there are, we can take those lessons away. But I think the other thing is that, there's a tendency to believe that NSI prioritizes technology rather than business outcomes. But actually, that's because most of the time, we're not asking the SI to change a business outcome or to implement a new target operating model. We're asking them to implement a piece of technology. And we take the accountability as the business ourselves to manage the people change and to, create a new process architecture and all the other stuff. And we're not very good at that. And therefore, that often ends up failing because that's not a skill. It's a skill we think we have, but it turns out it's not a skill that we do have. And then, you get the flip side where you do try to get the SI in to do the business change, and they don't understand the organization or the culture or the politics. So they start slamming into, executive incentive schemes that aren't aligned and all the other nonsense that goes on. And so again, you create a failure point where actually, if you'd thought about it a bit harder to start with, you'd realize actually we're not set up for success. Nearly all of this comes back to setting yourself up for success. And this is, start wrong, you'll never, ever end up right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And here's a follow-up question that touches back on a point that you made earlier, or that we talked about earlier, Stuart. This is from Darian on LinkedIn. She says, do you think most executives actually want control, or are they consciously trading it away for psychological safety? In other words, does it just feel safer if I just say, hey, let the big SI handle this. They're the experts. They've got this under control.
Well, that's a really, really interesting point, and that is very well made, because executives do think that if you get EY or Accenture or Deloitte or whoever it is in the room, and you've got their senior partner schmoozing you and giving you the 9-figure sum that it's going to cost to implement, they feel almost like a emotional relief that they're paying so much money to do this big thing, and it's all going to go perfectly. And they then become very surprised when it's all gone horribly wrong, and all of a sudden they've been fired. And I've seen it a number of times actually, where an exec has generally gone on with the belief that because it's been given it to the SI, he's now offloaded all of that executive accountability onto the SI, and if it all goes horribly wrong, we can sue the SI, and we are all absolved of blame. And I was involved in one where a whole raft of senior heads, including the CEO, either retired or got scalped because the thing had been such an unmitigated disaster. And the fact that they got an SI in didn't help them at all. Right. Especially as it was evidence later that they actually hadn't listened to what the SI was telling them and advising them in the first place. That also didn't help.
Right. No, it's a great point. And how do you actually, I'm going to bring up another question that leads into mine here. Here's another question from Ken, and I'm going to build on Ken's question here. But Ken on LinkedIn says, I've always said that if you really want to understand the product you're getting from any service provider, understand the revenue model. The SI's revenue model is billable hours. So my question for you, Stuart, just to build on this is, so going into these relationships that there is an inherent conflict of interest, because you think about it. I mean, the longer you take to implement technology, or the longer this project takes, the more overruns you have, the more change orders you have, the more your system integrator benefits. And it's hard for me to think of a good example of something comparable where there is such an inherent conflict of interest between customer and supplier, but yet here we are in the tech space where it does exist. How do you manage that? How do you navigate that conflict of interest?
I mean, I do it in two ways. One is I do it in a number of ways. One is I nail them on the business outcome for a particular amount of money. And there are all sorts of revenue models that you can put in place. I personally tend not to like fixed price, for the simple reason that I'm transferring the risk to the SI and I'm giving them a risk premium, but that's not going to stop them change requesting the hell out of the program. So my costs are going to go up anyway. So actually, I've almost never used fixed price as a control. What I do is one is to catch time and materials. So I hold the contingency, but I rigorously manage the delivery of what they're doing. I don't micromanage them, but I will give you a good example of what I will do. So let's say we've got 5 sprints. I hate that agile term, but it's useful in this context. Let's say we've got 5 sprints, and then we've got a testing and UAT and deploy. So each one of those sprints will have a specific set of outcomes, which we can define in our statement of work. It will have a cost, which is basically the aggregation of a number of man days by a number of resources to produce that deliverable. And then that deliverable will need to have a quality threshold. I call it the Holy Trinity: cost/resources, deliverables, and quality. So at the end of that sprint and through the sprint, once a month, once a week, usually once a month, I will get a burn down chart. And the burn down chart is on something called earned value. So earned value is not how much we've spent. Earned value is how much we've spent versus how much we've delivered. So if halfway through the time I've spent half the money, but I've delivered half of the number of deliverables that I was expecting to deliver, and they're of acceptable quality, I am on target. If I have spent 75% of the money and only delivered 25% of the deliverables, and of those 5% they've got to redo at their own cost, well, I'm massively behind.
Right.
And you can also use this theory in other ways as well. So on one project, not this one actually, but on one, we were under burning. So I was expecting a graph, let's call it a 45-degree angle, and we were only actually tracking up at about 30 degrees. And I knew, therefore, immediately, without even having to go and look, that we were under delivering, because we couldn't possibly be delivering what we had planned to deliver by this point if we're under burning. Because it just means we either haven't got the right number of resources on board, which for an SI is unlikely, or we haven't got enough material to feed the SI machine. So we haven't worked out how X is supposed to work. We haven't made a decision on Y, X, Y, Z, whatever those issues are. And all of that is slowing the SI down. And therefore, the actual amount of money spent that they're spending is less than we had anticipated. So burn down is earned value. Burn down is an excellent, God-given, golden way of managing and tracking whether or not you're on track on a program or not. I don't do these now without having some form of burn down report.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it works really well for in the construction industry. I know aerospace and defense a lot of times will do it.
Yeah,
it works. That's why they do it, is because they're such big, massive projects that they don't want to find out 90% of the way in that they're actually
only 10% of the work is done. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
The trouble is, okay, we are incredibly amateurish in IT. I mean, construction has been done for 2,000 years, right? And so is defense, probably longer than that. Okay, we've been doing this for 50, and it shows, because we don't have an industry-wide discipline. We don't have quantity surveyors. We don't have, proper, what I would call architects who can, work with the QS and work with the main contractor, the general contractor, to actually, develop plans that are robust. I mean, construction projects go wrong too, but it's quite rare that a building falls down because it's not been constructed right. Whereas it's quite common that a piece of technology, an ERP or an HCM or something, blows up because we've not been following a good set of disciplines.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. It never occurred to me that IT's relative lack of track record and immaturity compared to other industries might be part of the problem. That never occurred to me until just now. You talking about construction that's been doing this for a long time, and I think if we treated these projects more like we would inherently and intuitively treat a construction project, we'd probably do a lot better. Because if you think about all the things you should be doing with a construction or you should be doing with an IT project, you would absolutely do in a construction project. So things like you don't just hire a subcontractor in a construction project, like a plumber and electrician, just have them go do whatever they need to do, and they're just going to bill you by the hour without any sort of direction or business outcome, as you would say.
Yeah. But
yet that's what we do in IT a lot.
It's nuts, right?
It is.
and the outcome is entirely predictable.
Yeah, we know what's going to happen, and then we wonder why. And then you and I sit here having these conversations of why do these projects fail so often? Well, because they're not, maybe it's because we're not running them well.
Manage them properly. Yeah, exactly. We're not running them right.
Exactly. I'm here with Stuart, Robb. We're talking about how to regain control of your ERP project and your system integrator. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors?
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we publish. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
Wake me up, wake me up inside. I can't wake up, wake me up inside. Call my name and save me from.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 254. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this podcast every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And also, if you'd like to learn more about this topic we're talking about here today, how to manage your system integrators, be sure to download our guide to selecting the right system integrator and managing your system integrator. You can find that with the QR code right here in front of you, or you can go to the links below. But it's a good, nice complementary piece to this conversation that Stuart and I are having about how to regain control of your digital transformation projects and your system integrator. So be sure to check that out. So we are here talking about that topic. So let's jump back into the conversation. There's a couple longer comments. I'm going to try and condense these if I can. This one's from Laik on LinkedIn. I'll just get to part of your question here, Laik, because I think your first part is really good. I'm sure I've said this before, but the reason I keep saying be your own decision maker is simple. In a lot of transformation programs, there's no real decision maker in the room, or there's no one who can challenge the SI, ask the hard questions, and say, hold on, prove it. That's the real problem.
That prove it is the most, I mean, I use trust but verify. And there are two aspects to that. One is the vendor management side, which again, organizations tend to do extraordinarily badly with SIs. So, you know, just these simple stuff like tracing what's been delivered, tracing how the money's being spent, tracing whether people on the SI are being productive is done, you know, much worse than we would do if a builder was building our extension. You know, if the wall is crooked, we look at it and get a spirit level and say, well, that's crooked, take it down and do it again. We very rarely get down to that level of intrusive management. And it's true to say that you shouldn't have to, but, you know, for every 10 things they tell you, you should check one,
Right.
You know, because it's just good practice. I think the other thing, I don't want to sell the services at Third Stage too much. Yeah, actually, yes, I do. But I mean, the reason for having people who really understand the SIs in the room on the client side, I mean, you and I both do a lot of client side management and assurance, is precisely because we know exactly, or usually we can see it all start and wobble before it comes off the rails. And we know what the right questions to ask. I mean, I was saying to somebody, I mean, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, I had to do all of this really, it was hard work. Now I can usually even just feel instinctively, you know, whether it feels right or it feels wrong. And you don't need to look at a RAG report. In fact, they're the worst, most useless indicators of trouble or not that there is.
Yes, I agree.
Because you can. It's very interesting. I had this with a client. I was speaking to their group internal audit, and they were saying, "Well, your RAG criteria are not consistent. Your work stream is reporting red, and yet your report to the main board is green. So how do you reconcile that?" And I went, "Well, there's dozens of ways I can reconcile it. The question is, why is the work stream status report red? Is it red because they're not failing to deliver? Is it red because they're off budget? Is it red because they're not getting business engagement or resources? So what does that red actually mean? And then is that having any impact on the actual critical path or not? And does anybody even know what the critical path is? No, they didn't. And then you can say, so I have an objective to separate this company by the 1st of September. Okay, this work stream is red. All these other ones are green. So if I have all these green work streams deliver on time by the 1st of September, and this one that's red not, then is that red or green? Because I can still separate without this work stream. And so once you start drilling into what RAG means, what it means is nothing. It's meaningless. So I actually prefer to use RAG in the same way that you would use it on an airliner. Or any critical system. If there is something that's amber in a nuclear power station, actually I think they use white, but if there's something amber, okay, that means a value is out of tolerance and you need to go and investigate it, but it's not a critical risk, so go and figure out why it's not right and make a course correction. If it's flashing red, it's a master caution. That means the gear's not come down, you've dumped all your hydraulic fluid, or you've run out of fuel. In which case, that is a critical issue. Intervention is immediately required to course correct. And so you should be spending all of your attention on finding out what the problem is and going through what in airplanes they call QRF, a quick reference. But the problem is that even boards over rely on RAG to tell the truth, and there is no objective truth in RAG. It is just a sense of an alert for action.
Right.
And if you treat it like that, you'll create the right behaviours. If you treat it as an indicator of how wonderful your project is going, you're just it's just another failure point.
Which is unfortunately what happens a lot, because it becomes a self-preservation and a CYA tool, because you don't, and that's why we don't grade our own homework when we're in school or university growing up. The reason we don't grade our own homework is because we would have a bias or inherent need to, maybe not be as truthful as we want to be or as candid as we want to be with our own performance. And that's essentially what happens a lot of times, is these SIs are grading their own homework and saying, hey, things are green. Yeah, there's a few hiccups here and there, but these are totally normal. We'll work through it after go live. We'll work through those issues, or we'll push that out to phase 2. They've always got a reason, but they're not always good reasons.
I mean, there's a couple of points in there you make are really important. And that's like, unless you're measuring burn really carefully, what you'll find is that if, and I actually pulled an organisation up on this a year or so ago, that the work was not 100% complete, but they'd reported the burn down as 100%. And I said, well, how can the burn down be 100% if only 90% of the work has been done? What you're going to do is you're going to steal money from the next phase to pay for unfinished work in this phase. What you should be doing is CRing this phase for an extra 10% money and leaving the next phase alone. Otherwise, what you're going to be doing is creating a bow wave of incomplete activity that's going to continue to add cost until you get 2/3 of the way through the project, and then you're going to run out of money. Now, that on a project I was on quite early in my career is exactly what happened. The other thing as well is I find actually generally with RAGs, we start the first week of the project with everybody being really happy and their RAG is green. And then week 2, it goes amber, and it stays amber until the project is complete, when it goes back to green again, or it goes blue for complete or whatever. But, really they're pretty meaningless.
Yeah. Well, and Ken has a really good point that I swear I did not pay Ken to say this, but Ken on LinkedIn says you're making an argument for a strong PMO oversight and governance. Should that not be an independent advisory consultant with a good amount of that tacit knowledge along with explicit knowledge?
And if Ken wants to send me his contact details, which make him an offer he can't refuse in that exact regard.
Right.
I mean, that's why we exist, right? That's one of Third Stage's biggest planks of business in Europe, is doing precisely this. We do PMOs, we do, I do private equity and separations, but I manage SIs all the time. So whether I'm managing them directly or whether I'm providing the assurance, that's a good plank of business that we do in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think actually it helps. I mean, I know there aren't that many players in the UK, certainly. So I know quite a lot of the people anyway who do the really large projects, because there aren't actually that many of them. If you think there are the top 4 SIs, and each one of them has a practice lead and a couple of good senior directors across Oracle, in each one, you're probably talking 20 or 30 people in the UK that can actually do really big, heavy lift ERP and HCM or similar projects. There aren't actually that many. And so you tend to know, even from the individual, who are you dealing with? How did they do at the last one? What are the things to watch out for? And again, that's a behaviors and cultural thing that you can't teach somebody, and there's no checklist that can give you that. You just know, right?
Yeah. And that's why, Ken brings up a good point too around, the phenomena of having a RAG or a project status report that shows all green when in fact it is not green. Or you've got a yellow or red, but it's, hey, this just is normal stuff. Don't worry about it. It's fine. We're addressing it. Sometimes it's true, but a lot of times it's not true. And if you have someone who is objective and independent and isn't worried about hurting anyone's feelings, then you're going to get a more candid outcome. I know one thing we struggle with as a company, if we're being candid here, is that sometimes when we're working with especially the bigger SIs, is they'll downplay our assessment. If we say something's a risk, they'll say, yeah, but that's not a big deal. We're the SAP experts, we're the Oracle experts, whatever, Microsoft, whatever the product is we're implementing. We're the experts. These guys at Third Stage are independent. They're tech agnostic. They don't really understand that this is just normal. This is a normal process. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not a good excuse to to fix it.
I tend to try, wherever possible, especially when I'm doing things like assurance, I try to deal in facts, things that I can prove.
Right.
Sometimes you will present an idea, and it will not. You won't be able to back it up with evidence. It'll just be a feeling, and that's okay. But as far as really reasonably possible, will use the example. They've said they've done 90% of the work. They said they've done 70% of the work, but they billed you 90% of the money. So there's a 20% gap. Now you can call that red, amber, green, or you can call it Fred or Charlie. I don't really care what you call it. There is a gap that they have not addressed. So it's not, this is what normally happens in a project of this stage. This is, there's a clear differential between what they should have delivered and how much they should have charged and how much you have been charged. It's as simple as that. Now, the good vendor manager will be going back and saying to the SI, okay, you've done this and done that, and they'll find 50 million excuses under the sun as to why it's the client's fault and not their fault. And you go, it's all very interesting. So what are you going to do about it? And the what are you going to do about it question, you have to get to the right level in the SI before that question gets answered properly. Usually the partner or the senior partner, right? But eventually you'll get to the person who'll go, our mistake, or we think it's 50-50 us and the client will take 50% of the culpability. because they have an interest for these things to be successful too, and they make a minimum 50% margin, normally between 75 and 80% margin on these. They have got lots of fat in these deals, and they put a risk margin, and they put loads of line items in, unless you're really on board. I remember there was a budget I was given once. I might have told you this before. A budget I was given once, and it had 50,000 UK pounds in it for CSL, and I inherited it from somebody else. And we got to the end of the program, and I went, "What is this CSL?" And nobody knew, and I hadn't spent anything. So I phoned up my predecessor. I said, "What the blooming hell is this CSL?" And he went, "What's the Carling Stein Lager Fund? If it all went horribly wrong, I'd have spent out of that. And if it all went brilliantly, then we were going to go down a pub and go and have loads of Carling Stein Lager." I went, 50 grand. But, hidden contingencies, right? You will create a deliverable that you'll add 10% onto the cost of the deliverable, because there's your 10% contingency. I mean, you can hide contingency everywhere, and SIs do. Why wouldn't they? I do, and I'm client side.
Right.
I have a big line that says contingency. I know for an absolute fact that as soon as the project gets a bit tricky and the board don't like the number, they're going to get a red pen on that and divide it by 2. So I have the contingency I can afford to give away, and then all the hidden contingency that's spread everywhere else.
Right. Those are great points. So before I ask you this next question, Stuart, one thing I want to share with the audience is we do have a guide to selecting and managing your system integrator that I encourage you to download. You can find that by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or I'll drop it in the comments below as well. But if you download that off our website, it's a free resource. It gives you some advice on the things to look for as you're trying to define or evaluate your system integrator, as well as how to manage that system integrator appropriately. So I'll leave that up there for you for a moment, for you to let you scan that and peruse that offline once we're done here. But in the meantime, Stuart, and another question that I have for you is, are there certain activities that should never be delegated to a system integrator, or on the flip side, things that absolutely should be delegated or relegated to the SI's responsibility?
Well, the vendor management should never be delegated to the SI. You have to be in charge of your own destiny, right? And ultimately, whether you have a assurer or a client-side program director, or whatever structure you put in place, ultimately the accountability has to be that of the client, and the client has to be in control. And if the client isn't in control, then it is by default going to go horribly wrong, because you've got a commercial operation who is there to create and generate profits, basically, taking money out of your company with no proper oversight and no proper governance. So it doesn't really matter what the governance is, more other than the fact that you've got to be doing it, and you've got to be doing it with rigor. So whether you do that through a commercial vehicle or a program delivery vehicle or an oversight PMO or whatever it is, you've got to, and what you've also got to do is to make sure that the SI doesn't try to shield you out of it as well. So you've got to be C-suite appointed as the C-suite proxy to do that control, so that C-suite proxy is managing the SI, is controlling the spend, is managing the scope, is making sure people are not coming onto the program left, right, and centre, start billing for doing God knows what. And that's your responsibility as the client, to make sure that control process and control mechanism is in place. I mean, Graham R56, says delegate to the SI, poacher becomes gamekeeper. Well, yeah, actually, I consider myself now to be the gamekeeper to the SI poachers. And so I do what I can to make sure that I've got good governance in place. And to be honest with you, an SI who wants a good long-term relationship with the client will actually appreciate that, because I'm quite prepared to turn around to his lordship, whoever that C-suite person is, and say, it's not the SI cocking this up, it's us, and we need to do these actions. And I can have that conversation, and that will carry some weight, because it's not the SI, saying, it's all your fault. It's somebody who is, client side says, how can we be saying to the SI X when we're not doing Y?
Right.
That carries quite a lot of gravity with it, and usually, those kind of interventions can be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot like the fox guarding the hen house is the other saying that we often use.
Yeah.
And here's a follow up that Ken has that builds on Graham's point and the point you just made, Stuart. And that is this. He says, quite often, however, the client product sponsor doesn't want that bad cop PMO in the room challenging the system integrator. They don't want the stakeholders to think there's a built-in conflict, which then feeds the change management question. Why are we doing this?
No,
So how have you addressed that? I know that's something you're really good at, is navigating that.
I mean, any client who is being delivered to by any supplier, there is an inherent quote unquote conflict. Okay, whether it's an SI delivering me an ERP or the dodgy builder outside building my extension, there is a conflict point. Okay. I want the job done as cheap as possible for the highest possible quality. The builder wants the job to be referenceable, but he wants the most amount of money out of it. That's a straightforward commercial relationship. Now, what it might come across is that I am bad cop. Well, yes, I am bad cop, absolutely. When it requires bad cop, I am bad cop, because all I am doing is holding the supplier to account. That's it. Okay, if they said they were going to do something and they've not done it, then I will hold them to account. If it's our fault, then I will hold us to account. I will hold the C-suite or whoever internally hasn't been pulling their weight or whatever the reason is. But that doesn't mean you have to have a bad relationship. It doesn't mean you have to go into every meeting, with your thumping your fist on the table and throwing things at the SI. In fact, that's the last thing you want to be doing. There's a great. I was taught by a guy who was actually the general manager of Ford purchasing in Europe, part of the Chartered Institute of Purchasing Supply, and he said actually the way to get the best out of a vendor is to be warm but tough. So to develop a warm, collegiate relationship, go down with the vendor, have a beer, or whatever, but make it absolutely clear that there's a line that is not going to be crossed, and that you don't want to see, bad cop side. And if it comes to that, you will just hold your ground and you will just be tough, and you won't go. I mean, if you ever go to law with an ERP program, you have failed. So you don't want to be in a position where you are threatening them with, adjudication or law. You want them to deliver you what you think they have promised you to deliver at a cost that they have agreed to deliver it by. And that is always your tunnel vision. That's always your focus. Are they delivering what we wanted to at the price? If they're not, what course corrections do we need to make? That might be course corrections that they have to make. There might be course corrections that we as a client have to make. But the end goal always has to be the same. Is the delivery going to be successful? And are we going to get it in time and to roughly the price and quality that we were expecting?
Right. And I think it's, if we focus on those business outcomes, which has been a recurring theme of what you've suggested here today, if we focus on business outcomes and take out the emotion, I think that's a big thing, because I think Ken's question brings up a broader issue, which is a lot of times the SI feels threatened because you're calling them out, and it's almost like it's a personal vendetta or a personal indictment on the firm, and it's not. It's about the client. It's about what is the client getting, what are they not getting, and what do we need to do to make this client successful. And if we all focus on that and take the emotion out of it, we shouldn't be offended by anything that anyone does in these projects.
Yeah, I mean, the SI. Most of the time, I have a very, very good relationship with the SIs, but that's because I've been working with the same people for like 20 years, right? So I know them well. And we have a very, very collegiate relationship. We see each other from one engagement to the next. Some of the engagements have gone well and some have gone slightly less well. There are a number of players who have tried in the past to edge me out or push me out or, basically play a few games at the client. And those people have found that I'm quite a formidable operator when I need to be. I mean, when I play chess, I play at least 10 moves ahead. And so some people who are trying to, outsmart me with 3 moves find themselves in for a massive disappointment.
Right.
So, again, partly I don't want to have a bad relationship with anyone, and I certainly don't want to have a bad relationship with an SI. But you muck about with me, you're gonna find me. I can play games too, and I can play them usually quite effectively.
Yeah, but I've seen you do that though, and it's all in the name of the client though. That's the difference, or that's the thing. You're doing it because you're trying to make sure that this client is successful.
Yeah.
And that they're dealing with reality, not a pipe dream.
They don't want some SIs, and there's very few of them, some individuals, and I want to come back to the point of individuals. Some individuals see you as a threat, so they try to, what do they call it? Fence you off, and then, get you out of the picture, undermine you. Usually I've just found that the simple thing is to just play the straight bat, because quite often my experience and the experience of people like me is such that actually they have quite a difficult time nailing their particular arguments closed. And I always go back to the evidence. I think there is a point though, and it is very, very important. And it's something that I always take with. When you are dealing with an SI, you are not dealing with a firm. You are, but you're actually dealing with an individual. Now, that individual happens to work for a firm, and those firms have certain cultural traits and behaviors that you can kind of identify the difference between one or another. But in general, when you're buying a SI, you're buying one or more individuals. And therefore, very start, if the individual that you get is not someone you think you're going to be able to develop a good relationship and you're not going to be able to work with, you just say straight away. There's usually a senior partner or a senior partner or a managing partner or somebody you can go and say, I really like your proposition, but I just don't think it's gelling with this chap, and we really need to, if you can, swap him out, because KPMG beating my door down. And you usually find that does the trick, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good stuff. So in addition to the audience here downloading this guide to managing SIs, which is on this QR code right here, I'll include it in the links below. Be sure to download that. It's a free guide on our website on how to select and manage the best system integrator for your situation. What kind of closing advice do you have for leaders that are trying to get started or trying to figure out what path to go down with their system integrator, whether it's trying to find the right one, manage them? What's the top 2 or 3 things that you would say every leader needs to know before they get engaged with one of these bigger system integrators?
Don't rush it.
Okay.
Take your time. Make sure that the partner you're getting has the capability, works effectively with your team, and has the right behaviors and attitudes. So find a piece of work for them to do. Help with the enterprise architecture. Do a discovery. Do anything that's a small, contained, couple of $100,000 piece of work. You can work with them that you've validated, that you think that they are people that you can trust and work with. Number 2, remember it's a contract to deliver stuff. If your contract is bad, then you will never recover from it. So get a contract in place that has very clear business outcomes and a way of measuring how you're progressing through the delivery, so that you can checkpoint along the way to make sure that the expectations of what you've spent so far is roughly in line with what you were expecting to be delivered so far. So, it's good. It's good relationship. Start with a small piece of work. Make sure that relationship is effective. It's good governance. Make sure you've got a way of tracking the Holy Trinity. And then I think probably lastly, it's don't be afraid to intervene and verify and check or course correct if you think things are not going right. Don't let the problem with the SI become irremediable. If you think you are having a problem and you're not sure, get someone in, not necessarily third stage. There are one or two other people out there, I think, who can do the sort of services that third stage provide. But get someone in to have a look at it, because it's much cheaper to have a look at it and fix it before it becomes a catastrophe than it is for it to be a catastrophe and then get somebody in to try and fix it.
Yeah. And I think that might be the most important tip you've made throughout this conversation, or the most important thread that you've touched on, which is, no matter what, no matter how much you like the SI, no matter how good the system integrator is, don't cede control without having that trust but verify governance and mentality in place, because ultimately you do have to manage them just like you would any contractor, just like you would manage, if you were going to have a house built, if you or I were going to have a house built, going back to the construction analogy, I highly doubt either you or I or anyone listening right now would say, okay, we're going to hire a contractor and just tell them to go build us a house. And we're going to trust them because they're really good at what they do and we like them and they've got good references, they're a good name, blah, blah, blah. That will not be successful, will not meet our needs because we haven't managed it, we haven't been active in it, we haven't put guardrails in place for the contractor. But yet that tends to be the mentality of what we see in the IT space, is that we'll just cede control, we won't put governance in place, we'll let the SI manage us rather than us managing the SI. And I think that's one of the big problems we face.
Well, and it's fatal, right? I mean, it's a good way to lose a lot of money very quickly.
Yeah. I always look at the discipline that some of our clients have when they are going to do another big capital investment. Like they're going to go acquire a company, they're going to build a factory, they're going to build a new distribution center. The amount of discipline they have in those sorts of projects is totally different than the lack of discipline that you see in IT projects. Yet the price tags are the same, the risk profiles are arguably even higher for IT projects, yet we manage them a lot looser.
Absolutely baffling. And as I said, it's not that we can't do it, it's the fact that there's no industry imperative that that is the norm. It's the exception, not the norm, and it shouldn't be. And it is what it is, right?
All right. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you again for being on the show. Always good to have you. Always very enlightening and entertaining all at the same time. So I appreciate having you on the show. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to debrief on some of the things that Stuart and I just talked about. And then we're also going to talk about why Kingfisher said no to an SAP S4HANA upgrade and what they did instead. So be sure to stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed.
I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation. And you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my soul.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 254. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And Darian, we just had Stuart on the show to talk about how executives can manage their system integrators and leverage the strengths that system integrators bring to the table, but not lose control of their projects and not lose control of their sanity in the meantime. So what were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, I always love when Stuart comes on. I feel like he makes a lot of great points. And like you said, he's a longtime guest. So he's had a lot of different conversations on this podcast.
Yes.
But to your point, talking about control and different things like that, one follow-up question I had per your guys' conversation was what responsibilities should never be delegated to a system integrator?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that should never be delegated to a system integrator is the actual management of the system integrator and the governance for the overall program. Because a couple things. One is we talked, Stuart and I talked about how you don't want the system integrator grading their own homework. You don't need the fox guarding the hen house. What was the other? The gamekeeper versus the poacher, I think was what the audience member was talking about. Whatever analogy you want to insert here, you don't want that. And the way around that is to make sure you've got governance and a PMO, program management framework, that you use to manage the system integrator rather than the other way around. And this is important because not only because you don't want the system integrator grading their own homework and inflating the health of the project, because what you need to know is the reality, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, or both. You need to know as a client what's actually happening. What are the actual risks? What's going well? What's not? And if you're hearing that the project status reports are all green at any point in a project, even if it's day one, then there's a problem already. But it's not only that, it's not even just the realistic view of the status that you want and the realistic view of the risks that are inherent in these projects. It's also the fact that you think about an overall program, like an overall digital transformation program, and the system integrator is typically handling one work stream within a broader program. So there's usually the technical work stream, which the system integrator is responsible for one system typically, and maybe some associated modules or subsystems or whatever. But a lot of times there's multiple technologies being deployed. So you might have multiple system integrators and multiple vendors involved. You're definitely going to have a data migration track. You're going to have a change management track. You're going to have a architecture and data management track. You're going to have all these different pieces of the overall transformation. But what happens is when you put too much control in one work stream, that work stream is going to consume an imbalanced amount of the budget, the time, the effort, the resources, the focus. And that's the myopically wrong way to do it because you're focused on the wrong thing. You're not focused on the overall program. Now you're just focused on technology. So if you have your system integrator running the whole thing and they're the ones in charge, because of self-interest, they're just going to suck up all the time and budget and effort and resources and all that stuff, when in fact, more and more of those resources should be deployed across other components of the overall transformation, which is outside the realm of what the system integrator does. So that's the inherent conflict there too. It goes well beyond just the whole COIA, let's, inflate the project status reports because we want to grade our own homework. It's even deeper than that. So those are a couple of the challenges I think that need to be navigated very carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And going to governance, what breaks when projects are managed by narrative instead of by facts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Stuart alluded to this as well. There's not a clear, objective, and consistent way that organizations can measure health of a project. Now, he did give some good quantifiable frameworks about how to manage and track earned value versus actual budget. I think that's a really good point because that is something you can quantify. Like I've burned up 82% of the budget, but I've only delivered 42% of the deliverables of the work that has to be done, which tells me right there I've got a problem. So that's something you can measure. The harder part is something like, for example, our people are going to resist change in certain parts of the organization, certain departments or certain locations of our organization, they're going to resist the change. And how do you quantify that? Well, the way we do it is we do an organizational assessment that's quantifiable, and it actually measures quantitatively the level of resistance and the level of alignment and adoption and all that stuff from a change management perspective. So even though change management is touchy-feely, it's a feel, it's a narrative, as you might say, there's also numbers you can apply behind it so you can track trends and see how things are moving along. So as much as you can, put real data into the situation and put real objectivity into the governance. I think that's the key thing. And when you're missing data and you're missing objectivity, we're going to base things on vibes. It's just going to be like, oh, it feels like it's going to be fine. or we'll deal with that after go live, or we'll just whatever. If that's a problem, we'll push it out to phase 2. Those are some of the worst answers you can hear, the worst solutions you can hear, especially the one that says we'll figure it out after go live, because a lot of times, quote unquote, figuring it out after go live means cleaning up a complete train wreck of a disaster. And that's the last thing you want. So I think you just need someone who can connect all the dots and be objective and quantify some of these risks.
Absolutely. And last question here from the conversation with Stuart. When you talk about people change versus technology change, I know you guys touched on this. Why is best practice, quote unquote, dangerous when it comes to replacing listening?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that really bothers me and has bothered me for a long time in this industry, is that, first of all, there's this false perception that software vendors somehow know better than you as a business operator on what best practices are. And that's just complete garbage, because, I mean, first of all, these are technologists. They're not business people. They're technologists that build software. Of course, they do not have a clear understanding of what, quote unquote, best practice is. Second of all, even if they did, even if they proclaim to have that, or let's just say they're smart enough or they know enough about business to be able to give their best shot at best practices, chances are pretty high those best practices aren't going to apply to you in a lot of cases. Now, in some cases, some more commodity-focused business processes like accounts receivable and general ledger and basic accounting type stuff, sure. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. You don't have a lot of creativity that goes into building your general ledger or the way you do your tax filings with regulatory bodies. That's not an area where you want creativity, you want consistency, and you do want best practices. But when it comes to how you deliver and outperform to your customers, when you stack up against your competition, that's where best practices just are completely irrelevant, even if they did exist. And of course, my argument is they don't exist, but even if they did, they're irrelevant to you, or they should be irrelevant to you in many cases, because your business can and should be designed differently than every other organization out there. And so I think that's the key thing there, is that we have to listen, we have to understand. And if we're consultants that are blinded by the fact that we, quote unquote, have all the answers and we've got best practices, it not only is it arrogant at best, but at worst, it means you just, to your point, you don't listen. It's like, I don't care, Darian, how you do your job today, because that's not best practice. And it's going to get replaced anyway with the way my software works, which is best practice. So yeah, tell me all you want about how you do things today, but it really doesn't matter. I just want you to know how to use my software. And so, and I'm oversimplifying, I'm generalizing, I'm stereotyping. It's not always true, but it's a lot more true and common than I think is healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a great conversation. Like I said, I always love when Stuart comes on. I feel like he always has so much to say.
Yes, he does. He's very entertaining. He's a very smart guy, one of the smartest people I've ever worked with, and really enjoy having him on. So we'll have to have him on again soon. And if you're based in Europe and you'd like to reach out to Stuart, we've tagged him in this post. You can talk to him about how our team there in Europe can help you with your initiatives. You can also reach out to me. I work closely with Stuart, and also I work not only with the European branch, but also the U.S. branch and headquarters for Third Stage Consulting. So wherever you are in the world, Stuart or I and the rest of our team can help you with your projects. So be sure to reach out if you've got questions or you want to chat more about anything related to your project. So the last segment we want to get to today, I'm excited to share. It's a YouTube video that I recently published on my YouTube channel. And it's where I talk about this company, a big company out of Europe called Kingfisher. And they are an SAP customer. They decided not to upgrade to S4HANA, and they decided to do a bunch of different stuff instead, regardless of SAP's push to get them to S4HANA. And I still don't know how or why this happened, but I guess the way this all came into public record or into public eye is that the chief technology officer of Kingfisher gave a presentation at a Gartner conference about their roadmap and what they were doing instead of an S4HANA upgrade, which I find fascinating, because nothing against Gartner, but Gartner is oftentimes touting the messaging of software vendors, especially SAP. So I was actually surprised to see that they even allowed the guy on the stage to talk about something other than the mainstream narrative, which is get rid of your technical debt, get rid of ECC, and move to S4HANA. So regardless of why it happened, whether or not it should have happened, it's great because it's a great story. So let's play the video for you, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
And one of the major challenges and issues and questions that we're helping clients answer and solve right now is the question of what to do about their current ECC environment and how to upgrade to S4HANA, or if to upgrade to S4HANA. And the common narrative from SAP and others is that you need to do it now. Your maintenance and support is about to run out. You need to get rid of technical debt. You need to future-proof. You need to get rid of your customization and go clean core. All this stuff is rattling around in the sales and marketing circles of the SAP ecosystem. And it turns out not many organizations, or not enough organizations, are agreeing to that path. Recent studies have shown that a majority of clients of SAP still haven't begun the upgrade from ECC to S4HANA, and there's good reasons for that. However, there's still a subset of organizations out there that feel like they have to upgrade S4HANA, or that they have no choice. And that's what makes this topic of today's video so interesting, because I've talked for a long time about how you have options. You don't necessarily need to go down the path of S4HANA, or if you do go down the path of S4HANA, you should be the ones to dictate the tempo, the pace, the strategy, and all that good stuff. But it's just been recently that a major company called Kingfisher, which is a large retailer out of Europe with 2,000 stores, decided, you know what, SAP, we're actually not going to go down the S4HANA path. We're going to stay with ECC. And guess what else? We're also going to innovate. We don't need S4HANA to innovate. We're innovative enough with ECC on the back office side of things, the system of record. So we're going to go pursue other alternatives with AI and other things I'll talk about in this video to realize the innovations that's being sold by SAP. So what I want to do today is talk about what exactly Kingfisher did and what that means to you and your potential roadmap for your SAP path going forward. Now, if you'd like to learn more tech agnostic and independent objective advice on how to handle your upgrade to S4HANA or your potential upgrade to S4HANA, be sure to read our Guide to Successful S4HANA Implementations. You can read that by scanning the QR code right here or go to the links below. So what did Kingfisher do instead of upgrade to S4HANA? Well, they didn't sit still. They didn't say that they're just going to remain on the legacy ECC system and just leave it alone. They decided that they're going to innovate. They're going to introduce AI. They're going to introduce cloud. They're going to introduce predictive analytics and all these different capabilities that are going to make them more innovative, but they're going to do it without S4HANA. It starts with cloud. They decided that they did, in fact, want to move to the cloud. So they decided to move ECC from on-premise to Google Cloud Services. So they're able to take advantage of the fact that this hyperscaler can host ECC for them, and they moved their instance of ECC over to Google Cloud without having to undo some of the customization and intellectual property and all the data they had built over the years in the ECC system. And what about support and maintenance? We all know that SAP is just a couple of years away from cutting off support for ECC. So what are they going to do about that? They're going to be fine. They sign a contract with a third-party support provider. This case was Rimini Street, although there's other third-party providers out there such as Spinnaker, and they decided that they were going to extend the support of their ECC instance up until potentially 2040, which is the sunset deadline that Rimini Street and others have placed on their own third-party support. And the reason they rejected the mainstream narrative that you should be moving to S4HANA instead is the CTO, who recently spoke at a Gartner conference about this, said that he was going to see a 20 times increase in some of the cloud costs with S4HANA is what they're paying for S4HANA, and he just couldn't justify it. There wasn't a business case there. It sounds basic enough, it sounds like common sense, but in today's day and age, common sense is lacking at times, and too many executives and boards and management teams get caught up in the appeal and the allure of moving to the latest, greatest, shiniest object, which in this case can be S4HANA. But Kingfisher didn't fall for it. They decided that the cost wasn't worth the potential benefit. Now you may be thinking, if Kingfisher didn't go to S4HANA, they're certainly not going to be able to take advantage of Joule AI and some of the other capabilities that SAP has rolled out. And you may be right that Joule is not an option for them, but there's plenty of other AI tools out there, and they decided to go with a third-party tool. And with these third-party tools that they've implemented, they've been able to focus on things like AI-powered recommendation engines, personalization, flexible pricing for their customers, and even chatbots that can provide better customer service. And again, they did this all using their back office ECC and not upgrading to S4HANA. Whether or not those AI chatbots and other AI capabilities are as good as Joule AI, I couldn't tell you, but it sounds like they're getting what they need so far and what they want to get so far from AI without having to go through the heartache of ripping out all the stuff they had built over the years within ECC. They've also re-engineered their entire tech stack to focus on an API driven environment where APIs are what create or allow for integration between systems, between SAP and other third-party systems. So they created this API-driven environment where now they have a more modular, almost a microservice sort of environment with ECC at the core and other applications and layers of technology on top of that that all talk to one another within a cohesive environment. And this all demonstrates the fact that some organizations, including Kingfisher, are able to get innovation out of their current technology without having to fall prey to these tactics of thinking that technical debt is bad or that you're not future-proof if you're not on the most recent version of technology. They're actually modernizing and innovating as we speak, but they're leaving ECC in place as the back office system of record. And let's be clear, ECC is not a bad product. It's been around for a long time. It's stable. It's years or decades of innovation and R&D built in it. Organizations have built their own intellectual property within ECC. So there's some good stuff there within ECC. It may not be the greatest and latest, but it could be good enough for a system of record to where now you could put other technologies on top of it to leverage that and really finally fully get the business value out of ECC. And for many of you, you may have found that you still haven't recouped the cost of your initial ECC investment years or decades ago. In this case, this could be a perfect strategy for you to really milk those assets and to maximize the ROI on what you've already spent rather than taking a swing for the fences and just hoping that you hit that home run and somehow get a positive ROI when maybe you didn't even get it on ECC. So rather than trying again and hoping for the best and taking on the massive risk, Kingfisher decided that didn't make sense and they were able to get innovation without going through all the chaos, pain, and heartache and cost that goes along with a massive ERP implementation. So what does this mean for you and what does this mean for the ERP market in general? Granted, this is just one company, very large company, but just one company in the ecosystem that's decided to hold off on an ECC upgrade to S4HANA. But I think this is a sign of a broader movement and a broader backlash in the industry. I think SAP has been pushing so hard on customers to make that move from ECC to S4HANA, and they've been largely unsuccessful if you look at the metrics of conversion from ECC to S4HANA. And I think companies are starting to be smarter about making those decisions. They're not blindly following the upgrade path that the vendors have laid out for them. This reminds me a lot of Y2K back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So many organizations were panicked and they rushed to upgrade their systems. And it was just a mad rush of new software sales and implementations. And this is that next wave, except in this case, it's a manufactured panic and sense of urgency that just isn't working in the same way it worked in the Y2K. So this is good because I think companies are being smart and deliberate about it. They're not rushing off the cliff and just jumping straight into the unknown. They're taking a step back and waiting until they can see deliberate and measurable and definitive value and risk mitigation from those implementations before they do it. And I think competition has gotten so great within the ERP space that SAP can only go so far with their strong arm tactics. It may have worked in the past when they were the gold standard, and they are still a gold standard, but I wouldn't say they're the gold standard the way they used to be. Yes, their stock price is through the roof. Yes, they're still the largest ERP vendor out there, but there are just so many options out there now that weren't around on a material basis 10 or 20 years ago. You look at Workday, Salesforce, even companies like Boomi and non-ERP systems like that that have come out of nowhere over the last decade or more, and they are chipping away at SAP's market share, and they're making SAP less relevant to where SAP doesn't have the same leverage over their customers as they did before. I think this also forces vendors to be more transparent and more thoughtful about what is the real value to customers. In my opinion, it is not enough to say you need to get rid of technical debt. That's just garbage to me. That's just marketing nonsense that doesn't mean anything. It suggests that it's bad, but it doesn't mean anything. Technical debt doesn't mean anything. Or future-proof. Future-proof is a made-up word that is completely false. There's no such thing as future-proof, but it makes you think that, oh, I want to be future-proof, even though S4HANA and every other ERP system that's out right now will eventually be obsolete, so that's a load of garbage as well. So vendors now have to shy away from this marketing speak, hoping that that's going to convince enough people to move, and they have to get back to the basics, which they should have been doing all along, which is what is the business value? How am I going to get an ROI from this? And if I can't, then maybe I shouldn't buy your software. So I think this is a good thing longer term because I think it gets vendors back to the fundamentals of why they're in business and what their customers really want. They don't want future-proof. They don't want to get rid of technical debt. They want business value. Now, the dark side of this, if there is a dark side to Kingfisher's strategy, is it is still somewhat of a short-term or a limited runway. Third-party support for ECC will not last forever. They're saying now that it'll last till 2040, but who knows? It might last a little bit longer, or maybe it ends up lasting a little bit less. We don't know. We know it's at least enough to give several years of runway to Kingfisher and other organizations out there, but it's probably not a good long-term fix. Although, quite frankly, it may be enough to get us through the next wave of whatever's next after S/4HANA. So we'll have to see. But it is something to be aware of, and that is a very real risk. So this is one example I've shared with you today with Kingfisher and their refusal to move to S/4HANA and their alternative path that they pursued with their ECC environment. But what does this mean next? What should we be watching next? Well, first question I have is, will other companies follow Kingfisher's lead? I have a feeling that this is the start of a broader movement, and I think this is the next wave of SAP's cloud adoption strategy, and I think it's a backlash to their cloud adoption strategy. I think you're going to see a subset. I don't know how big the subset will be. You're going to see a subset of big companies that push back, use their leverage, and negotiate with SAP or push back on SAP and refuse the narrative that they're trying to cram down their customers' throats. I'm also curious to see how other vendors outside the SAP world respond, because I think a lot of companies follow SAP's lead and maybe to a lesser degree Oracle's lead. So I'd love to see how other ERP vendors respond to this potential backlash that SAP is seeing with some of its customers. I also wonder if third-party support will become better known as a more viable alternative for SAP customers and other non-SAP customers as well. For a brief period of several years, third-party maintenance providers were in litigation with some of the software vendors. I won't get into details of that, but that created some uncertainty around the viability of these third-party providers. But those court cases have since settled, and now they appear to be gaining more traction in the SAP community. So I'll be curious to see if there's more third-party support providers that pop up throughout the ecosystem and what this means to overall third-party support in general, which I think is a good thing. Anytime there's competition, that's a good thing for customers. And most importantly, I wonder what this means to the overall ERP software landscape. Is this potentially the beginning of the end for the old monolithic ERP model? Is it potentially the beginning of the end of the let's double down on cloud movement that we're in the middle of right now? Is it the beginning of a bigger trend towards microservices and best of breed and integration interoperability platforms like Boomi and MuleSoft and Rapid and others? It's yet to be determined, but I think it's foreshadowing some pretty tectonic shifts in the SAP community as well as the broader ERP space. But I'd love to hear from you. I can't read the future any better than you can. I could just base it on what I've seen in the past and what I see in the market right now and what I think will happen in the future. But what do you think? What do you think this means for the SAP community? Do you think this is a smart move on Kingfisher's part? Do you think other companies will follow? Do you think it's a terrible idea? They should be sticking to the SAP's narrative? Love to hear your feedback in the comments below.
So that was my recent YouTube video about Kingfisher and how they recently said no to an S/4HANA upgrade and what they did instead. What were your thoughts and observations from that video, Darian?
Yeah, such a great video. I love how you pointed out like this real world example, obviously, of Kingfisher. And obviously, there was some, we had a question earlier that we answered from this video, but I want to dive into a couple more questions just to follow up on this video. One being, what is the real breaking point for ECC? Like, at what stage does good enough truly stop being good enough for these companies?
It's a good question. I don't know that we have an answer for that. And a lot of it, of course, is going to be dependent on the company. It's going to vary from client to client, but most clients we work with are perfectly happy with ECC. That's the weird thing, is it's almost like SAP did too good of a job with ECC in the past, and that's haunting them now because customers are pretty happy with it. And they did a good job locking customers in. They locked them into ECC. They built all this customization on the platform. They integrated it to a bunch of systems. They moved all the data over. And now here we are decades or years later, and those same customers are saying, wait, this product's great. We don't need to move. And so I think eventually that will change, because eventually SAP is going to put so much R&D into S/4HANA and so little R&D into ECC that gap between good and good enough or whatever is going to grow. But for now, it's not clear enough for most organizations to change. And even if there is some incremental value potentially to moving to S/4HANA, they certainly can't justify the big price tag and the risk that goes along with that. And the hardest part is that customization that we've talked about. They built customization in ECC, and we as an industry love to say how bad customization is and how terrible it is. It's technical debt. It's not future-proof, blah, 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 blah. That's not true, first of all, because the customization, yes, sometimes customization was needless. It was customizing something you should have never customized. That does happen. But what also happens that the industry does not talk about and refuses to admit is that so many organizations built really good intellectual property that are unique competitive advantages. They built those customizations in ECC, and that's a strength for them. But we as an industry and an SAP community come forward years later after those implementations to say, oh, actually, that sucks that you did that customization. We sold you on the idea that you could customize and how great the tool set was back then, but now we're telling you it sucks and you need to get out of that customization and move to S4HANA Cloud. And the reason we want you to move to S4HANA Cloud, by the way, isn't because S4HANA Cloud's better or the customization is bad, but because we make more money off S4HANA Cloud. Much higher margins, much steadier recurring revenue. Your customization sitting in your on-prem system doesn't make us money. So we need you to get rid of it so you can move to S4HANA. So that's the real driver, if you ask me. It's not because customization is bad. Customization has gotten a bad rap because vendors hate it so much. And they've beat us down as a listening audience. They beat it into us that customization is bad, technical debt is bad. You're not future proof. Move to the cloud, or else you're going to fail. I mean, we've just been getting that messaging beat into us for so long that many of us start to believe it. So I think that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yes, for sure. And one last question with this. In your opinion, Eric, what industries are best positioned to follow Kingfisher's lead on this? Or who should not try this strategy?
Well, Kingfisher has the luxury of being a larger organization, so they certainly have more leverage with SAP and any other provider out there. But it's actually not even about leverage. I think it's more about confidence and leadership. A confident leader that has clarity and is aligned with, knows where they're headed and what they want to be. They're not gonna fall prey to some of this messaging that vendors are putting out there. I'm not saying the messaging is always a negative thing. For some, it makes sense. For some, yes, go to S4HANA because, you might have a compelling reason to do it. In the case of Kingfisher, they don't have a compelling reason. And there's unfortunately a lot of companies out there like Kingfisher that don't have a compelling reason to do it. They don't have a business case. All they see is a big price tag, but they just believe and trust SAP, and they end up going in on these projects without any clear direction. And it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think that's weak leadership when that happens. And so the strong leaders are the ones that are going to challenge the assumptions. They're going to ask the hard questions. They're going to make sure they have complete clarity on why they're doing what they're doing before they do it. And that I think is the key thing that Kingfisher did. And that's the key thing that a lot of organizations are missing. So I would just try to motivate as many leaders listening right now to just be clear about what it is you want and ask these tough questions before you invest tons and tons of money and risk on these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a great episode today. I feel like we covered so many different topics, but a lot of great information.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for being here today, and thanks to the audience for the great questions. Thank you to Stuart for being here. And the audience over time is providing more and more of the content that we talk about and more of the topics we talk about here on this podcast. So I really appreciate everyone that listens and comments and provides feedback, because we take all that, even if we're not directly responding in real time, we are reading it all. We're soaking it all in. We're using it in many cases in future episodes of podcasts and videos. So thank you for that. Hope you're all enjoying the holidays and are looking forward to the new year. Have a great week. We'll be back next Wednesday, same time, same place. You can also go to Transformation Ground Control to see all the past episodes of this show. If you'd like to learn more about Third Stage Consulting and how we can help you in your organization through your digital transformation journey, we're happy to help, happy to talk about our service offering. You can reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. So hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.